All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Awesome. Well, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Michael. I'm not a pastor here or anything like that. I'm actually a college student at Indiana Wesleyan. I'm a senior there. And I'm finishing my bachelor's in Christian ministries and am soon to begin seminary as well. So, I'm new at this whole gig, but I'm learning, I think. I hope so, because, if I'm not learning, I'm in trouble. But we've been talking about a guy named Elisha, and we've been talking about this idea of faith. So we're going to unpack today some more about faith. And the thing I find about faith, we talk about it, it's just kind of a cliche word, and what does faith really mean? It's kind of confusing, I think. Faith. Okay, what does that mean? People say have faith. What does it mean to have faith? And I like that we have the Bible, and Hebrews 11:1 is kind of the go-to for this. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the certainty of things not seen. That's Hebrews 11:1, which is kind of like a dictionary definition, which is helpful. I like it because the Bible gives us sort of an answer to this question, but it's still kind of like, okay, so faith is, say that again, the assurance of, it's still kind of confusing. I still get kind of bogged down, it's like a dictionary definition, it's helpful, and it's not that helpful, you kind of have to see it in context. I'm the guy, whenever I look up a word, I'm like, okay, give me 5 sentences that it's in, because otherwise it's like, I know what it means, but then again, do I know what it means? But yeah, so a definition is kind of hard to throw on the word faith. It's helpful to know, but maybe this is something that is easier. They say it's more caught than taught. And you can understand what the definition is, but maybe it's more helpful to have examples. And I think that's part of why we have so many examples of faith in Scripture. And so today we're going to be talking about Elisha again. He's kind of our example. And so we're going to look at Elisha and his example of faith. And particularly today, I want to talk to you about persistent faith. I'm calling this finish line faith today. And what does it mean to have a faith that finishes, a faith that's persistent, a faith that can go the distance? So today we're going to be reading from 2 Kings. It's an Old Testament book. But I promise you, contrary to popular belief, there are interesting things in the Old Testament, if you didn't know that. So 2 Kings chapter 2 is where we're going to be reading from. So let's go ahead and dive right in. 2 Kings chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven, so Elijah, he's this prophet at this time, and Elisha is sort of his protege, so Elisha's coming to the end of his ministry. We're picking up at the end of Elijah and at the beginning of Elisha. So Elijah, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself lives, I will not leave you." So when they went down to Bethel, the company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elijah, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. So they went to Bethel and they went to Jericho. And these are, if you're catching on, these are a couple places where there are other prophets who are stationed here. So that's, if you didn't know, there was actually other prophets than some of the ones that are mentioned in Scripture. So there's other prophets. So they get to Jericho, and the company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be silent." And then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of the prophets also went and stood at a distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, struck the water, and the water was parted to one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, Tell me what I may do for you before I'm taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses separated the two of them, and Elisha ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in pieces. He picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back, stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle that had fallen, struck the water, and said, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" When he had struck the water was parted, and he walked across on dry land. So today we're talking about Elisha, and what it means to have this kind of faith, this kind of persistent faith, the kind of faith that can go the distance, that doesn't give up when things are difficult. And the first thing I want to talk about today is that persistent faith has a foundation. And now the thing about foundations is we know this, is that you can have a bad foundation. And so it's not just a foundation, it's what kind of foundation. We teach this when we're very, very little. I can prove it to you. Are you familiar with the story of the 3 little pigs? Yeah, anybody? Yeah, okay. I read nursery rhymes too. So we got 3 little pigs, right? And one of them builds a house out of straw, one of them builds a house out of sticks, and one of them builds a house out of bricks. I actually had to look this up. I really did. Sermon prep, 3 little pigs. So we got 3 pigs. One of them builds a house out of straw, one of them builds a house out of sticks, and one of them builds a house out of bricks. And the thing is, the big bad wolf comes around, and he starts huffing and puffing because he's hungry, and he wants some bacon. And he starts huffing and puffing, and he blows down the house of straw. And he blows down the house of sticks. But he gets to the 3rd pig, and he blows, and he blows again. Gonna have to catch my breath. And the house doesn't blow over. And the thing is that the foundation of the 3rd pig was a firm foundation. You see, Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. Stay here. I have to go on further. I have to keep going." And the prophets told him, "Hey, don't you know your master's going to leave you today?" And Elijah said, "Hey, as long as the Lord lives, I'm going to keep going." And when they said to him, "Hey, don't you know he's going to leave you?" And he said, "Be silent." Some of you today need to start telling your critics to be silent. You see, the truth is that in your faith, your well of faith has to be deeper than your criticisms. Because there are going to be wolves who are going to prowl around. Perfect timing. Could not have timed it better myself. But there's going to be wolves who are going to come your way. And they're going to huff and puff. It's not just what your foundation is. How deep is your foundation of faith? How deep is it? Because if you have a shallow foundation, your foundation isn't going to stand. Your faith is going to crumble. And your criticisms are going to wear you out. When people come to you and say, "The Lord will never take that from you." God can't do that in your life. Which is going to be louder? Which is deeper for you? Is it your foundation? You see, The examples of faith we have in Scripture, people like Noah, people like Abraham, people like Peter and Paul, they were tested. People thought Noah was ridiculous. It hasn't rained in like 100 years. What on earth are you building a boat for? Your faith has to be deeper. Your well of faith must be deeper than your criticisms. You see, there was a pastor who talked to me one time, and he was telling me about one point in his life when he was on staff at this church, and this senior pastor came to him, and he said, this was a great guy. He's like, I have nothing against this guy. Great pastor. He said to me one time, he said, Miles, this guy, his name is Miles, and he said, Miles, you're never going to preach, you're never going to pastor a church any larger than like 100 to 150. And nothing wrong with small churches. And he said, I had great respect because this guy was trying to get me to live into my calling. But he said, when I heard it, it was like a stab to me because I knew that God was calling me to something different. And I was tempted to let that define God's vision for me. To let that be what God was able to do in my life. So you'll never pastor more than that. And he said it was at that point that my well of my personal relationship with God, of what God had said to me in his word, what God had told me in the quiet of my bedroom, I had to know was more true than what someone else had said to me, even the people who are close to you. Sometimes the people who will tear you down are the people closest to you. Your faith has to have a foundation that is greater than your criticisms, because it is then that you can be faithful. This brings me to my second thing I want to point out to you today, and that is that persistent faith is faithful. You see, you might be surprised to know that the word faithful and the word faith actually come from the same root. Do you know that? I had to go to Bible school to learn that. But it's funny because it's so easy to disassociate these two terms. We look at faith and we say, oh, I have this great faith. I can conjure up this great faith. I can do miracles. I can do these great things. I have faith that can move mountains. And faithfulness, that's boring stuff. I don't want to, that doesn't have a ring to it, faithful. It's just kind of mundane, I want to have faith. I want to be like superhero faith. I want to do big things. I want to have faith like Moses and faith like Noah. Can I tell you something? You know that faith starts with faithfulness? You see, faith doesn't have to be something you conjure up. It doesn't have to be something magnificent. You know something? You know that faith doesn't have to be a feeling. I don't have to have a goosebump to have faith. I don't have to be in a church service to have faith. I don't have to hear the pads and the piano and the guitar swell and have my hands in the air to have faith. It doesn't have to be a worship conference with the greatest pastor you've ever heard who's screaming at the top of his lungs. That's not the measure of my faith. Because my faith starts with my faithfulness when I walk. In the little things. You can be faithful every day. That's faith. We think faith is the moment. We think it's the pinnacle. C.S. Lewis says it like this. He says, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. See, I have moods that change all the time. I tell you what, I know very well, ice cream is not very good for me. I know it's not. It's like all the ingredients in ice cream are something that's not good for me. But when I walk past the freezer, not so bad. It's not so bad anymore. I'll just have like 3 scoops or 5. And you see, how good ice cream is for me changes depending on how hungry I am and how badly I want ice cream. And sometimes we treat faith like that. How much faith I have is dependent on how much I feel God today, or how much the sermon helped me out today, or how much that guitar swell is, and I'm feeling it in the worship service. But that is not the measure of your faith. And you see, sometimes we like to compare others' outward expressions. Hear this. We compare other people's outward expressions to our inward struggles. Let me say that again. We often compare others' outward expressions with our inward struggles. We look at people who are doing big things and go, man, I want to have faith like that. I want to have faith like Elisha. I want to have faith like Billy Graham. I want to have faith like this Joe pastor who's doing big things and who just baptized 500 people. That's the kind of faith I want to have. And we think we got to take these leaps of faith. Can I tell you something? Before they were ever there, they started out in a small room in prayer on their knees in faithfulness. And just because someone is doing big things doesn't mean they're not in a faith crisis just like you, because that's not the measure of their faith. And maybe you need to know today, your faith is not a measure of your outward expression. And don't think that you're the only one who has doubt. You know, the opposite of faith isn't necessarily doubt. Sometimes the opposite of faith is thinking that you know. Maybe the opposite of faith is certainty when you don't have to trust in God. Faithfulness. I don't have to feel it. I can choose it. I can choose to have faith. You know, before you can leap, you have to walk. Did you know that? You can't just... Before you walk, you have to crawl. Some of you are crawling in your faith today. Can I tell you something? Keep crawling. You don't have to leap to have faith. You just have to be faithful. I noticed that in this passage, 3 times, Elisha keeps going. 3 times Elijah says, hey, stay here. I'll go on farther. Elisha says, no, I'm going to keep going. Second time, Elisha, stay here. I'm going to keep going. No, I'm going to stick with you. You know, and people have pointed out that there's, kind of a significance to the number 3 in Scripture. Christ was, he rose on the 3rd day. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. There's a lot of 3s in the Bible. And there's a lot of, talk about what numbers mean in Scripture and blah, blah, blah. And maybe it's significant. But what I know, what I've noticed, what seems to make sense to me is that, you can't accidentally do something 3 times. I can do something once on accident. Second time, it's like, maybe it was just for kicks. But 3 times is no longer an accident. Let me prove this to you. I don't know anything about parenting because I'm not a parent. So I'm going to offer my 10,000-foot perspective, and it's every bit of 10,000 feet. But you don't accidentally have 3 kids. Yep, let that sink in for a second. You don't accidentally have 3 kids. See, I see this all the time. I'm just an observer. But you got a young couple, they're married, and they're googly eyes. They start hanging out with other couples. These couples have kids. They're like, ooh, look at those kids. Wow, look at the little baby. He's so cute. They get the googly eyes. Oh, we should have a baby. Aren't they so precious? And they are just curious. Curious as all get out. They start hanging out with these other couples and bam, pregnant. Oh, this is not going to go over well. Oh boy, what have I done? I should just stop now. But they're just curious. They want to know, what's it like? Second kid comes around. This time, they're just crazy. They are just out of it. I don't know what they're thinking, They're like, we have one kid. He has to have a friend. Can't be by himself. And I don't know, maybe 2 kids is better than 1. Again, 10,000-foot perspective. What do I know? But then they have 2 kids. Then they're really in for it. But you know something? The 3rd kid, come round 3. The 3rd one is not a coincidence. By the 3rd kid, it's not a coincidence, and it's not by happenstance. I can say this because I'm the 3rd kid. For round 1, round 2, round 1, round 2, that might have been complete coincidence, Woo, what do we know? But come round 3, 3rd kid is no longer a coincidence. It didn't just happen. You know why? Because 3 kids is a lot of work. And you know that after having 2, and you didn't make a mistake the 3rd time around, all right? I'm just teasing, guys. But 3rd kid, that's a commitment. Because you've now chosen, you said, I have made a choice. I want to raise my kids a certain way. I've made a choice to take care of these little people. And it's a commitment to live a certain kind of life. It's a commitment to take care of someone. And you see, you don't do something 3 times accidentally. You don't just show up at round 3. You don't just maybe you do. Maybe you just wake up. Oh my gosh. But Elisha persisted 3 times. And it wasn't by happenstance. It wasn't by coincidence. He chose it. And the thing is, you might look at Elisha and say, how do I have faith like this? How do I have faith that doesn't give up? Faith that's persistent. And let me tell you something. He was faithful before then. This wasn't the first 3 times he was faithful. I'd be willing to bet before we get to 2 Kings chapter 2, Elisha was already practicing faithfulness. He was faithful in his job. He was faithful to his parents growing up. He knew what it was to live for God. And he said, that's what I'm fighting for. I'm choosing it every day. Because when it gets hard, when I get to the difficult time, when I'm really tested, it's going to be harder to be faithful, and you're not going to wake up in a difficult situation and go, I have faith for this. No, you got to practice it first. And here we think faith is something you got to conjure up for these big moments so you can do big things. Can I tell you something? You're not going to start with something big. Jesus says if you're faithful in the small things, you'll be trusted with many. You don't just start out of nowhere. You're not going to have faith that just It's a choice. And you can choose to have faith when you feel it and when you don't feel it, and when it's easy and when it's hard, and when you practice it when it's easy. When it gets hard, it's not so hard to have faith anymore because you've had faith all along. You've had faith all along. And this is the kind of faith that you practice, the kind of faith that you choose, faithfulness. That's the kind of faith that can go the distance. And the third thing I want to say today is that persistent faith knows what the finish looks like. See, I kind of like fitness stuff. Maybe it's not that obvious. But I do actually. I like feeling good and like feeling fit. I like exercising. It's a good part of my day. Like it helps me, I don't know, it's good motivation, helps you de-stress. It really does help you de-stress. Because I have, college student, stress all the time. But thing about fitness is like, you have to have goals. You have to know what your goal is. You have to have like an objective. And there's different like objectives in fitness. Different people have different goals. And you know this because sometimes it's kind of obvious. Like when you go into the gym, as a guy, like you go into the gym, and there are some pretty obvious different fitness goals. Like some guys, you go in, and their goal is just to lift as much weight as they possibly can. They are just like, I want to lift all the weight that you can put on a bar, and I want to lift it. And you know this because they're not really trying to lose weight, or, their image is not an issue. I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I'm really not. But some guys, their like mentality is like, if I am as big as a truck, then I can lift a truck. And they're like, I'm going to just put as much protein into my body as possible. And then I'm going to go to the gym and just, and that's their goal. Some guys, they have the opposite goal. Their only goal is, I'm the, Mr. Summer Bod. And you know this because you will always find them in front of a mirror. Even when they like walk around the corner. And there's plenty of mirrors in the gym, but oh, hello. I see you. Always like trying to like sneak a flex, like, oh, let me wipe my shirt. Oh, yeah, how are my abs looking? That or like you'll see them like doing one exercise for an hour, They'll be doing just bicep curls. 2 hours later, same arm. Because they're just trying to get their body to look exactly the way that they want. And so there's different goals. But thing about our faith is that there's only one goal. Let me read to you verse 11 again. Verse 11, it says this. It says, as they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. So, let me get this right. Because he is. See, sometimes I think I get the idea that maybe like the goal of my faith was to receive something. Like Maybe at the end of the day, I'm supposed to get like a bigger paycheck or something. Or maybe like my life's supposed to turn out a little better. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm not supposed to have problems anymore. Or, and here we have a guy, Elijah, who he's given his whole life to ministry. He's been prophesying to the Israelites for years. He's given everything he has. He's given everything to God. He doesn't have money. He doesn't have possessions. And here he comes to the end of his ministry. He's ready to hand over the mantle to Elisha. He comes to the end. He's done everything that he can. And then he ascends into heaven. I think sometimes that's confusing for me because I think I'm going to hop off into my beach house in Florida. And maybe I think so that's now is when you take away all the hard stuff in my life, right? Now that I've done everything and now that So it's sometimes I get the idea that there was something else that I was shooting for, but that's not what I'm seeing here. What I'm seeing here is that Elijah gets to the end of his rope, and what he gets is Jesus. And right before he leaves, he looks at Elijah and says, hey, what can I do for you? Is there one last thing? And Elisha, he goes, hey, can I have a full portion of your spirit? When's the last time you asked for a full portion of the Spirit of God? And what Elisha knew in that moment, and when Elijah goes off to heaven, what he knows is that the goal of his faith is not an outcome in his life. The goal of his faith is Jesus. You see, Elisha knew the difference between the giver and the gift. Some of you are still looking for the gifts. You're looking for the pretty bows that God's going to send you. You're looking for everything to work out. And you've been walking this faith walk, and you're like, man, this hill is steep. Man, my legs are getting tired. But if your faith is dependent on an outcome, if your faith is dependent on the way things are working out for you today and tomorrow, if that's what your faith is based upon, it's just a matter of time before your faith falls apart. Because I can tell you right now, if your faith is in the gift, if your faith is in something you're going to receive, what if you don't get it? What if you don't get that job? What if you don't get better? Is that what your faith is in today? And I'm not telling you today, I'm not telling you that God can't change your circumstances. What I'm telling you is that your faith shouldn't be in whether or not He does. I don't believe God for whether or not He can change my circumstances. Your faith is just in God. It's not Jesus plus another job. You see, I'm really not, I know I said I'm sort of into fitness, but I'm really not a runner. I hate running. It's like my least favorite thing. I like doing other things. I like, sports, and I like all different kinds of exercises, basketball, football, things like that, But running is just, I don't know. It's no fun. But I make myself do it. I really, sometimes. Sometimes I run. Um, but the thing about running is that you never know when you run when you're going to get tired, or like you never know when your shins are just going to start killing you, or like sometimes you can't anticipate when that hill that you've ran a few times, when it's just going to be extra hard. And sometimes you don't know, you try a new route. And sometimes like, oh wow, I didn't realize this route was so hard. Good golly. But the thing about running is that you don't run just to run. I mean, because if you stop halfway, what did you do, I mean, sometimes I still have to get home. The thing about running is that you run with the finish line in mind. And when your shins start killing you, when your legs are extra tired, when your heart's beating, and you're like, man, that's when you have to remember the finish line. And you see, some of you have been running today, and you're looking at the course and you're going, good golly, that hill. God, can you see this right now? As if God doesn't know. And the thing is that the purpose of running is that you have to know your finish line. And some of you, your finish line is something else. You've let something else be what you're trying to accomplish. And Elijah says, that's not what it's about. I don't care if I don't have anything. My finish line is Jesus. That's my finish line. I'll tell you something today. Like a couple years ago, I had this interesting insecurity where, so I go to a small Christian school, and it's basically like christianmingle.com, but like on campus. And that's, and so like, there was a point like a couple years ago, like I wasn't at that point, I wasn't dating anybody or anything. I didn't care. I was like, but all of my friends were like either engaged or soon to be. Yeah, crazy. I'm like 19 years old at this time. And like I started getting teased sometimes. I'm not hating on my friends at all, but like sometimes they joke with me and be like, oh man, one of these days, like Michael will get around to it, One of these days some girl will fall for him, like. And like, all good fun. But like after a while when like people are like getting married every other week, like I started to feel like, is there something wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? Like, I just didn't know, like, is there a reason why this, is it me? Is there something that I don't have or something? Am I missing out? And I remember one day somebody asked me, I was at somebody's house, and like I had been praying about this and thinking about it, and he said, Michael, do you feel that pressure? Like, do you feel that pressure to be like getting engaged or getting married or all this stuff? And I was like, you know what? And like I thought about this a lot, but I finally verbalized it, and I realized what God was teaching me, and I said, you know what? Like, I don't need any of those things. I don't need that in my life. I said, because that was never my purpose. That was never what I was supposed to be. Yeah, that's all good. It's all good things. But like, you can take everything away from me. Heck, I can flunk out of school. I can lose my job. I could be a homeless guy on the street with nothing. And guess what? I still have my purpose. I still have my portion. You see, the double portion of God, it's not something you can buy with a dollar bill. It's not something you can mark off your checklist. It's not something you can receive. It's Jesus. That's your full portion. And he's given it to you today. And the question is, do you know what your finish line is? Because that's it. It's just that. Your finish line is Jesus. And no matter what you're going through, whatever it is, you are not at the end of the line. You're not. If you think you are, you're wrong. Because that's not how you finish. Jesus is where you finish. And it's not just far away. It's not just heaven. It's today. It's tomorrow. It's every day for all of eternity. Here's your finish. And are you going to finish strong? That's your finish line, folks. You hear that today? Because the wolves are going to come. They're going to blow. They're going to huff and puff. But they can never take away. Paul says to live is Christ, to die is gain. Even if you lose your life, you still have Jesus. You can't lose it all. You've been given everything. Put your faith in that today. Have a faith that doesn't give up. You don't give up. Why? Because you have everything. You have everything. Pray with me today.